Hello, my name is Mo, and this is chapter 13 on personalities. Alright, so in this video, we are going to talk about some of the nuances surrounding personalities. We'll talk about the psychological defense mechanisms and why we unconsciously use them. And then we will talk a little bit about this idea of self concept or self actualization tendencies and how that relates. And then we're going to enjoy some lovely videos of my roommates taking some personality quizzes and talking about the results. So sit tight, it's going to be fun. The psychological defense mechanisms are ways of dealing with anxieties by unconsciously altering our perception of actual reality. So, the first one we're going to talk about is denial, which is refusing to accept a situation. For example, when I broke my collarbone longboarding, I refused to accept it until the EMTs got there. The second one we're going to talk about is repression, which is pushing bad thoughts to our subconscious or unconscious minds. For example, someone who experienced abuse as a kid might not recognize it into adulthood. They might not remember that it happened at all. Rationalization is coming up with excuses for unacceptable behavior. For example, someone may make excuses for their partner's laziness with not doing their house chores by saying, oh, they're just tired, they had a long day. So this next one is projection, which is placing our own unacceptable thoughts onto someone else and claiming they're the ones with said thoughts. For example, a teacher can't have a thing for their student, so they convince themselves it's the other way around. Reaction formation is having an emotional reaction that's opposite of our threatening thoughts. For example, my dad says that he doesn't like dogs, but I think on an unconscious level, he actually loves them because I see him playing with them all the time. So, this is displacement, which is redirecting negative thoughts and feelings onto other people. So, for example, if I'm on the road and a dude cuts me off, it might not have anything to do with me, but he might be angry about something else. So, regression is falling back onto childlike behaviors when you're in a stressful situation. So, for example, a teenager who is extremely stressed might take up thumb sucking in the middle of finals. So, this next one is identification, which is attempting to become someone else in order to deal with anxiety. So, for example, if I have someone in my life who's very cool and level headed, I may attempt to become just like them in order to deal with my stressful situation. So, this next one's compensation, which is attempting to make up for areas which lack superiority. For example, someone who is bad at math might go out of their way to be great at arts in order to make up for that. So the last one is going to be sublimation, which is turning socially inappropriate behaviors or urges into acceptable behaviors. So, for example, let's say you and your partner break up, and in order to deal with these negative emotions, you begin to write poetry and songs. You're able to transfer all of those negative emotions surrounding your heartbreak and emotional upset into a creative activity. So, this next concept is the self actualization tendency. Maslow and Rogers believed that human beings are always striving for fulfillment. And this act of striving is the self actualization tendency. And the self concept is something that we use in the development of our sense of self. So, what this means is that what we're told by others is how we create this idea of our self, and it's reflected in the words and actions of the people who are most important in our lives. So the next concept is the real versus ideal, which ties into this self-actualization and self-concept theories, where you end up with two pie charts. On the first pie chart, you'll notice that there is a lot of harmony between the two. They're very interconnected, whereas on the second one, they're pretty far apart and there's not a lot of harmony, which means that the person in the second situation is experiencing anxieties. Now, the reason that I mention these concepts in regards to our defense mechanisms is because these anxieties are attempted to be rectified by coming up with ways in which we are not responsible for our actions. So we use these defense mechanisms in order to quell some of these anxieties that we get from our self-concept and our idea of sense of self. So in this next part, my three roommates went ahead and volunteered to take the Big Five test, or the five-factor model, which represents the core of human personality. So that goes by OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Hi, my name is Lindsay.
Hello, I'm Dale.
Elizabeth.
All right, so unfortunately I won't be able to highlight everyone, but I'll go ahead and talk about Lindsay's results and post Dale's and Elizabeth's and have a little retrospective at the end of this. All right, so these are Lindsay's results, and we'll go ahead and intersplice some videos to talk about what she thought about these specific results.
Yeah, I'm creative and intellectual. I'm an engineer, but I enjoy the creative part of being an engineer. And I like thinking in abstract ways. I like thinking about philosophy and art and politics and emotions and empathy. So I find that to be pretty true of myself. And for me, that's partially true. Like when I set my mind to a certain goal, I can complete it, but I also easily get sidetracked and procrastinate sometimes. That's definitely true too. And also on like previous tests I've taken all within the last 3 to 4 years, I've also got like 50% extrovert, 50% introvert. So this is accurate to that. I do often put others' needs before my own. However, I'm usually pretty firm with myself about drawing the line into like how much investment or how much energy is too much. It's rare that I get like sucked into giving someone so much energy and investment in my time that it's no longer worth it anymore. So I guess it's higher than I expected because I'm generally not an anxious person or a pessimist or a person who has negative emotions about the world. However, I do struggle with depression and moodiness, so that's probably why it rated me at 25%.
All right, so kind of looking back at what we talked about, you're noticing that in general you agree with your percentages, but there are of course nuances to every individual, and this is something that's going to be really important as someone in the field of psychology who recognizes these nuances and understands that these types of personality tests might assist you in better understanding an individual. But honestly, this kind of one-on-one interaction is really what's gonna get to the core of how that person is feeling and how they experience life. And I think it's really important to note that although these are useful and helpful, we don't necessarily want to rely on them solely for our at-home psychological analyses that we tend to do on ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for me, personality tests like this have given me the framework and the words to be able to communicate how I perceive myself, but they're not something that I live my life by. They're just a tool that I use to understand myself better and communicate that out to the world.
I think that's important that you note the time that we're in, unprecedented coronavirus locked indoors is certainly making people exhibit traits that they wouldn't necessarily in a regular workplace. So it's interesting that you kind of wrote that in. And I agree, it's important to note when you're doing any kind of study that you recognize all of the external factors, or as many as you can, that would potentially influence the study itself and the way your participants go through that study.
I agree. I'm curious if maybe that's why I rated a little higher than I expect on extroversion, because we're quarantined right now, so I'm missing people.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as Zoom connects the world, it takes away a little bit of that interaction with people.
All right, so just to recap, first we talked about some of those defense mechanisms that we have, and how they kind of tie into not just our sense of self, but the way that our personalities come out and show themselves to others. So I hope this video has been helpful, and have a great day.